All right, and I hope you can all see my screen here. Welcome to the third so far installation of the Symbiota support group. We have quite a few of the Symbiota Support Hub folks here today with us. So we have Jen Yost at Cal Poly, Samantha Oriana at ASU, Nico Franz at ASU, and Ed Gilbert at ASU are also here. And then there's me, Katie Pearson, and I'm at ASU and also Cal Poly. So welcome. Today we are going to just recap the resources that we have available and then talk about images specifically. So just a quick reminder, we are always pushing this, but Symbiota Docs is a really great place for you to find resources in the future. If you want to look for descriptions of the things that we have discussed today, you can find that information on Symbiota Docs. And then you can also find more information by emailing us at symbiota@asu.edu. So that's a way to reach out to us. The recordings of these Symbiota support group meetings are also posted on the IDIG bio page that's kind of where you found the registration link for this. If you don't have access to that, I will be sending that out once the recording is posted. I'll be sending out a link to that after this meeting. So if you don't receive that, please let me know. Okay, so today's topic is getting images into a portal, and this is a actually relatively complex issue because there are many ways you can approach the problem. And so we're just going to talk about some of the options that you have that might inform the way that you set up a digitization project or your specific workflow. So the agenda is, there are kind of two main steps when you're thinking about getting images into a Symbiota portal. First is, where do the web-ready images live? So there is going to be a place that these images live or are physically located or electronically located. And that might not be the same as where your data live. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then we're also going to talk about, once you have a place where those images live and the place where your data are, how do you link those two? So that's step 2. And then there are just a couple of other miscellaneous considerations that I wanted to bring up while we're in this webinar. And then of course, there should be time for questions afterwards. And if there's not in this hour, you can always just hang on and we can continue the discussion individually. Okay, so step 1, where do the web-ready images live? And one quick clarification I wanted to make here is that I put this important adjective web-ready in front of the images. And what that means is this is a JPEG derivative of your images. You may be making raw images that are like 45 megabytes in size, but that's not what is going to be helpful for a user looking at those images on a Symbiota portal, because they will take forever to load. Even on the fastest connections, you're going to have some issues with broadband, whatever. So you need a web-ready image, which is going to be only a few megabytes, probably maximum of like 10. And that's going to be what you can link to your images. Best is like 4 or 5, and usually to like the human eye, a 4 or 5 megabyte image is pretty good in terms of detail that you can view on it. Depends, of course, what the organism is and how much detail you're going to need to look at, but really these have to be derivatives. Another important point about the web-ready images is this is not the archival storage of your images. You need to determine where your images are going to live and to be safe, because that's not the same thing as the images that are going to be accessible to the public. So you need a storage place and then a place where those images can be linked to your collections. So we can talk about that more in the future, but that's just an important point. So images don't necessarily live inside the portals. You don't just store the images right next to the data. They're not just like a piece of the data. If you were to look into the SQL database, there is just a table where links to those images are stored. So these links can be to a server that is located really anywhere as long as it can be accessed via the internet. And then the portal will access that image table, find that link, and display whatever that link is. And so that's how you get this page here, is this came from a link somewhere. Maybe it was on the New York Botanical Gardens website. Maybe it was something stored in another server. But that's why if you hear us saying, what do you mean they're like living versus linking? It's because there is not actually an image next to your data, so to speak. Okay, so then where can the images live? They can live on your own server, so a server that is owned by your institution. And this has to be a web accessible server, so it can't just be like, yeah, I have them on this one computer. Can you just link them from my computer to the internet? There's a certain setup that you need to have so that any member of or any user can access those images from the web, and that usually requires some security features. So this is something that you would need to discuss with whoever is managing the server where you want to keep your images. So here is an example from the San Diego Natural History Museum. They keep their images on their own servers, and so they create URLs to access those images. So this URL could be put into the images table, and then you would be able to, anyone who is on the Symbiota portal could access the image using this URL. So it could be your own server, it could be a web accessible server that you pay for. So there are options where you can basically hire server space and say, here, I'm going to give you my images and you just give me the URLs so I can access them. And then another option is a portal related server. So I said that images don't necessarily live with the data, but they can. And so for ASU hosted portals, for example, so like CCH2 and SciNet and the Lichen portal and the Bryophyte portal, there are a bunch of portals that are actually hosted at ASU. So they're on ASU servers. Images can be stored on those portal related servers. So that is an option depending on kind of your setup, how many images you have, where your funding comes from, things like that. Another option is Cyverse, and this is something that you would need to set up with them. They're kind of just a subset of this web accessible server that you pay for. I know there are some agreements that people have made with Cyverse, so like the CERNEC group, and I believe the California Phenology Network, they also work with Cyverse. Once upon a time, images could also be stored on iDigBio servers, but that is no longer an option. That was kind of something they set up so that people could get going with the digitization, but it is not possible anymore. In fact, any images that are stored on iDigBio servers, a lot of them are going to get migrated to another server so that iDigBio can continue to be sustainable. So in the remainder of this presentation, you're going to see some things highlighted in red. And this means that if your images are stored on a portal related server, and by that, I mean like ASU, if your images are on the ASU portal, or if you're on the MICO portal, then that would be the servers related to the MICO portal, which is not at ASU. So just so you have your heads up, if you are considering getting your images stored on ASU servers, then these red highlighted points are going to be most pertinent to you. Okay, so once you've decided where your images are going to live, then you can think about how you can link all those images to their records. And I said that this is step 1 and step 2, but you kind of are considering them at the same time because you can figure out which way is going to be the easiest for you moving forward. Okay, so there are many ways to link images individually to their records, just one by one. This is like if you're making specimens kind of periodically, or you're making occurrences like observation occurrences. That means like you're going out and taking 1 or 2 field photos and then you're making those into occurrences. So you can do this individually through the occurrence editor. And I'm going to open up my example for the day is going to be CCH2 again, just because that's the one I use the most. And so if I wanted to add an image individually using the occurrence editor, then I could just open some random specimen. Say I wanted to add an image to this one, like I did a really close-up picture of a leaf or something. Then you can go into the Images tab. And then you can click this plus sign. And then you can upload an image here. So if you have an agreement with your portal that they are allowing you to store some images on the portal, then you can just click choose file and upload a file like that. However, if you have your images stored on another server and you have a URL to which that image can be linked or can come from, then you can click enter URL, and then you copy a URL into this right here. And so if I had that example URL from Baja California, like I showed previously, I could just copy and paste that right in here, and then it would be visible just like as if I was physically uploading the file into the portal. And then there's a bunch of metadata that you could add to this image as you're uploading it. So that's a relatively straightforward way to upload individual records. It's not necessarily good for high throughput digitization because you don't want to have to go to every single record and add it. But that's really good for if you're taking specific measurements or like specific detailed images. You can take those and put them up on your individual records. Another option to do individual images is through the create new records using images. So if I go back to my collection management, there's an option right here called create new records using image. And the same rules apply basically if your images are going to live on the server, then you could just click choose file and then upload your image. Or if you wanted to give a URL, so your images are stored somewhere else, then you click enter URL and do the same thing here. And then you can enter any skeletal data. And when you click submit occurrence, that's going to create a new record that has that image and then any skeletal data that you added. Okay, and then you can add images through the skeletal data entry tool. This is probably not going to be used by most people, but just so you know that it's there. So when you use the skeletal data entry tool, it gives you a little form where you can put in some basic information about a specimen that you want to create. So let's just say I have this one specimen and I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is my catalog number. Once I click add record, oops. Oh, just kidding. I have to make up a different fake one. Then there's a little icon right here. And if you click that, you can upload images right into the occurrence editor. So this is just like the first option that I showed you, but it's just kind of a quick link that you can get there from the skeletal data entry tool. So this could be an option if you are taking images and entering skeletal data at the same time. You could immediately upload that image straight into the portal with that specimen that you just created. The caveat to this is that usually when you're taking images, you're capturing like a very large raw file, and then you have to do some edits to it later on, and then create a JPEG derivative of that edited version. And usually that's a step that happens way after you're actually creating the image. So not a lot of people, I think, use this tool right now, but it is an option if you have a camera that instantly creates a JPEG that you're already happy with. Then you could just stick that right into the portal and not have to deal with it later. That does mean you have to individually upload images, but it also means that you don't have to rename the images according to their barcode number. And this is something that you'll run into with any of the batch uploading processes, is that any batch uploading process is going to require that image to somehow be linked to an occurrence, usually by its catalog number. So if you don't have the ability to rename images by their catalog number or barcode number, or you just don't want to do that, then this could be an option. But again, it is a one-by-one thing. And then another option is to upload image vouchered observations. And this is for your own personal specimen management or personal observation management. So you may have seen some of the documentation about using the personal observation management collection. This is usually for collectors who are managing their own specimens before they deposit them in a specific herbarium or other collection. So this would be, if you go into My Profile and you go to Occurrence Management, there is usually a personal observation, or in this case, it's called specimens being processed. This is like a general collection of observations, not necessarily voucher specimens, that can be managed individually, collection by collection, or sorry, collector by collector, or observer by observer. So if you were to look for specimens or collections or occurrences in this specific collection, so to speak, it's listed way down here in the observations. Or if you go over to observations, it's listed as an observational record. So like a specimen hasn't necessarily been deposited into a natural history collection. Someone has made an observation, but it's not necessarily a vouchered specimen. It doesn't have an accession number. That's what this specific observation profile is. And so you can create records in this observation profile using an image. And so here that's called Submit Image Vouchered Observation. This could be, you could make one of these, for example, if you are studying a rare taxon and you don't want to collect an actual specimen because it's so imperiled, and you just want to make an observational record of this. So you could add an image just by uploading right here. You can add all sorts of information. This is a little bit more fleshed out than the skeletal data entry, but you can add that all here. You can add it to a checklist and submit that observation. So that's a way of creating an observational record using an image. Okay, so those are the ways that you can add individual images to records. You can do it through the occurrence editor. You can create brand new records, either in the personal observation specimen management or just as part of a collection. And then you can use the skeletal data entry tool, which is also like beginning anew, creating a new specimen, and then adding an image to it. Okay. And then what is probably going to be of interest to a lot of you folks if you're doing big digitization projects is batch loading options. And so there are 3 main batch loading options that you will be able to see in your collection management. And they are uploading to a local or remote server. So that's one type. There's also uploading to an image mapping file. So that's, I'll explain that in a moment. And then there is Cyverse mapping. And so these 3 are very similar. They're just batch processes of telling the portal, here are the names of all of my images, and here are the URLs that should go to all these images. But they have different ways of creating these batch processes in the portal. And the reality is if you're interested in doing any of these options, you should probably just contact your portal administrator, or if it's an ASU hosted portal, contact the Symbiota support hub, and we can help you set up one of these profiles because they're a little bit complicated, but just so that people know in general what's going on and what is required of that, I'm going to walk through what it looks like to set up a profile. Okay, so uploading to a local or remote server. All of these batch loading processes will happen if you go into the administration control panel under processing toolbox. And the first tab in most portals is called image loading. And this is where you can access the ways of batch uploading images. So there are some saved image processing profiles here that this collection is already using. And if you wanted to create a new one, you could just go to this new profile box and then select one of the three options. And so you can see these match up with the three different types I explained in the previous slide. This is images from a local or remote server. Here's our image URL mapping file. And then iPlant image harvest is the same thing as Cyverse. Cyverse once upon a time was called iPlant, and now it's called Cyverse. So if I wanted to map images from a local or remote server, this means that the images either live in the portal, or not in the portal, in the servers associated with the portal. So in ASU servers, for example, that would be a local server. A remote server would be a server that is somewhere else, and the portal has been given access or security access to those images so that it can access them, download them. So if I were to map images from a local or remote server, there are a bunch of settings that I would need to set. One of these is a pattern match term. And so that's going to say, okay, the catalog number that you're looking for is going to be in the name of my file. And so you're going to look for a name that looks like this and associate it to my record. And I should probably bring up an example that is already set up for. So actually, let's go to the Bryophyte portal. We have our the University of Tennessee Bryophyte herbarium. They are on a thematic collections network with us, and they host their Bryophyte images on ASU portal, on ASU servers. And so they have created one of these image mapping profiles. And so they upload their images to our servers, or rather to a place where we move them to our servers and then link them over to their collections. So one thing about uploading to local or remote servers is that you will probably just contact your portal administrator to set this up. And if it's an ASU hosted portal, we will send you a Dropbox file share request. That's how we're currently doing this. But if the images live on remote servers, then you'll need to set up a mapping profile like I'm going to show you right now. So again, we go into processing toolbox, image loading, and then I'll show you the example of their image processing profile. Here is their pattern match term, and you don't have to understand this, but it's using a regular expression or regex to match the format of their catalog number to the image names. There's a source path, so that's the server, the location on the server where that where the portal will be able to find those images. Then it's the target folder where it's going to put those images. And then there are some options for the size of the image, whether we're going to apply some more compression. And then there are a bunch of other options here. So I show you this just to kind of clarify that there are some options for when those images get transferred. And probably one of the most important things that you all need to know is that in all these cases, if you're going to upload images to a portal-related server like ASU servers, then the file names must correspond to the catalog numbers of the specimens. So there has to be a way of linking all of these image URLs or just images to all the catalog numbers that you have in your collection. If you're uploading a bunch of images that don't already have records in your catalog or your collection, that's totally fine. There is a default action that this can take so that it will just create a brand new record for all these images that come in. It'll just be a very, very skeletal record of only a catalog number or whatever unique identifier is in the image name plus an image. And that's a workflow used by a lot of collections when they're digitizing, because they might say like, oh, we don't have any data, we're going to transcribe from the images. That's great. You can just upload a bunch of images. Those images will create a bunch of files or records, and then you can just enter the data into those records. Okay, upload an image mapping file. This is going to be mostly useful for anyone who has their images stored like on a local web accessible server or some place where they can produce a URL for every catalog number that exists. So if I go over to back here, if I wanted to do a URL mapping file, all you're going to do is upload a file that has, a catalog number column and a URL column. And there can be multiple URL columns. So there could be a large image URL, a thumbnail URL, a medium size URL, whatever. But you just need a very simple CSV or spreadsheet that is just catalog number and URL. And it's pretty snazzy. It just uploads that URL right into the portal so that you can access those images right away. And then I'm not going to go into detail about the Cyverse or iPlant mapping. The file names do need to correspond to the catalog numbers of the specimens with this option. But if you want more information about that, contact CERNEC or really Cyverse, or the California Phenology Network has been working with Cyverse as well. A couple of other considerations to make before we go into our Q&A, and that is if you are producing your own URLs, so if your images are living on your own servers or and they're producing URLs for those images, can your servers also provide thumbnails, or do they need to be generated by the portal? Because some institutions, they can have a certain size kind of generated on the fly from a derivative. So if you are able to generate thumbnails, that would be really great. Otherwise, if you cannot, then thumbnails can be generated using a couple of tools in the portal. So here's an example, again, using that San Diego Natural History Museum specimen. They have a way of, so here's the large image URL, and they have a separate URL for the thumbnails. And so the thumbnails, what's going to show up in search results. So that might is ideal for wherever you have all the storage, the images stored, you also have a place where you can store thumbnails. But again, those can be created on the fly or not on the fly, but those can be created in the portals as well, or alternatively. Here's another example from the Naturalis Biodiversity Center. Here is the normal large format, and then they have just a separate URL that has the medium format. And then if you are going to be using any of these batch image upload tools, we definitely recommend that you use small test batches and check the log files to ensure that everything is working as expected. So log files, super helpful. If you have any sort of saved processing profile and you've been using it, you can look at the log files that were created when you ran that batch process, and it will tell you what happened during that upload. So apparently there were no images on those upload dates, but you can look at what happened to all 259 of these images. So in this, it looks like they just uploaded a bunch of duplicates, and so they didn't end up getting linked. No images. And then you can look at, so here 81 were added, and then you could see these were already in the system. But if it said that it created a new record, it'll tell you. If it linked to an existing record, it will tell you. So log files are really useful for when you're just trying it out and when you're making sure that all of your images got linked during that process. Okay, so a little bit on the technical side, and there are a lot of considerations to make when you're trying to set this up. But what I basically wanted you guys to understand, or what I wanted to get across, is that there are many ways of getting images into a portal, and some of them can be batch processes, some of them can be individual processes. In reality, again, like I said, you'll probably just need to contact whoever you think is going to host your images, and then also contact the portal administrators. A lot of the cases that will be the Symbiota Support Hub, to figure out what's going to be the most efficient way, given how you are naming your images and how often you're going to need to upload them, etc. So with that, I'm going to stop recording and then open up the floor for any questions we may have or any clarifications that are needed.